And then it became apparent when you're a producer, like anything else, the buck has to stop someplace. So the buck stopped at the producer. So whenever an actor got sick, uh, I had to go act because Jerry Belson had no ability. He was a brilliant writer, one of the best in the whole world, I think. He's passed on now. But he didn't want to ever get in front of the camera because his main talent was he could play his eyes. He could do things. He would play his eyes in some way. He made a noise, and he could play tootsie goodbye. He did that when he was not feeling well. Years later, he did it on Laverne and Shirley. He played his eyes in an amateur contest. But that was his ability in front of the camera. So I did all the parts, and that's when I ended up in the SAG and did all the acting jobs when somebody got sick. I mean, guy who became, I can't remember his name, on Love Boat had appendicitis on a Thursday, and we shoot on Friday. And I went in and did his part. And so that's when I did all the jobs, and rather thought each one was quite interesting. You could learn something from it. But then we came back, did Hey Landlord, and failed, and wasn't at 99th in the ratings. But again, the historians should know, had one of the best writing staffs ever, with Margolin and Parker, who did Love American Style, Saul Turtletaub, who's a big writer, Harvey Miller did Private Benjamin, Jim Brooks' first script, Hey Landlord.
Really?
So it was all people, a terrible show, didn't work. But we had a wonderful time, and we all learned to actually write another level up just because we were all there. Jack Winter, another guy who wrote a lot of stuff out of Harvard, came to Harvard. We said, "You're from Harvard. You want to be a comedy writer?" "Yeah, that's what I want to be." "All right." We put him in. So that was a big change after doing a show, and then we wrote for everybody, and that was the first thing. Again, I was happy writing, such a contented person. Because why? Because if I got up in the morning and I wasn't sick, it was going to be a good day. So that was it. It's a nice thing. My wife said goodbye, and then Jerry says, "No, we're doing movies now. We got to move on. We did this." I said, "You don't like television?" "No, no." I said, "But we did a special. We won a Writers Guild Award for a special we wrote. We wrote a special the previous year that I thought was better than the one we won for, but that's life." And he said, "No, we do movies. Movies are great." So, all right. So we started to write movies, and we wrote two screenplays. One was called How Sweet It Is, a bad title. You think it's about Jackie Gleason. It wasn't. And I'm a producer. So there's a big meeting, and with the star, Debbie Reynolds. And so there's all these big shots there, and I said, "Miss Reynolds, I think you're very nice. Tammy and all this, you're great. But this is my first time as a producer. Is there anything you could suggest I do with the meeting?" And she said, "Ask me when my period is." And she walked away. I was stunned. I Really? So we go to the meeting, and Jerry's there, and I'm saying, and they said questions, and I said, I figured, take a shot. She's smarter than me. I said, "Miss Reynolds, what time of the month do you have that woman thing?" And she said, "What a smart producer. He knows I have these swimming scenes, and he's going to schedule when the swimming can be done, and I can swim. That's very smart of you to ask." And it was true. I had no idea what I was saying. But I said, "What a smart lady to tell me that." And suddenly everybody thought I was bright and brave. Nobody would have ever asked that question to her. They didn't know she told me. So it's the artist thing, how things move around. Anyway, we did that picture, and then we did a picture called Grasshopper, which we thought was maybe one of the best screenplays we ever wrote. And I certainly... one of the best I ever wrote, and it was, had a lot of trouble. We fired a director and then hired another director, and then got all mixed up with directors. We had to go back to beg Jerry Paris, a wonderful director, to come and direct the picture. We had known him. He was the dentist on Dick Van Dyke. He started to direct all the episodes, and he did it. But it was at a film festival years later. The Grasshopper, Jacqueline Bisset, the beautiful lady. It was on. The title of the festival was Unappreciated American Films. We were a big hit there. We talked after. There was a lot of people came and we spoke about it. So there was a closure that was part of it. But it suddenly we're into writing films, and as every writer knows, you want to get to protect your work the best you can. So we wrote it, and we said we want to produce it. So they just put it, but we got to do producing things, and we didn't understand so much about music as a big part of writing. So we went to this I don't want to name names, a famous composer, but it was the late 60s. It was an era of drugs and things were going, and we went to his house. It was very big, and we sat there, and they brought him out in his pajamas. They had a way. I mean, it was like a 2 o'clock meeting. They dragged the man out, and he comes staring out, and he sat down on the piano, and he played like eight bars of something, and fell off the bench onto the floor and passed out. And Belson said, "I liked it so far." That was our first experience with composers. But we learned all the aspects of how all the elements in a film or in a TV show have a bearing on your original written word, and that became a big part of my career and his. We stayed together many years, and we learned about that. And then it was, we were into movies, having done 2 movies, both failures, both for less money than we made in television. And we were sitting, kind of twiddling our thumbs. Should we go back and write episodes? What should we do? And there is an element of luck in this field. And first time a lucky thing happened, the Paramount Studios we had worked for on and off doing a lot of episodes, decided to do a show called The Odd Couple that Neil Simon had written the play. Neil Simon didn't have a good deal with Paramount because they had paid for his play to go to Broadway, and they kept the television rights, so he didn't have a very good deal, so he didn't want to do it. So otherwise he would have wrote it himself. So they hired us to write the television version of The Odd Couple, and again we had to cast it, which is a whole other story, but we got Tony Randall and Jack Klugman, and we wrote as close to Neil as we could, you know. And I remember we handed in the script. It was a whole original pilot, and they said, well, this is what Neil Simon writes. It sounds like he wrote it. And we said, that wasn't the point? You want another version of what he wrote? And then somebody bigger than that person said, no, that's what we want. They didn't steal it. They just made that same writing pattern. Neil had a certain pattern. We studied it. We went and saw The Odd Couple, everybody's version. And so anyway, went on the air, and it was not a hit, but it was okay. And then Tony Randall went on The Tonight Show. See, you go back to and he said, we're dying. We got a great show, but it has a laugh track, and nobody likes the laugh track, and it's silly. Write to ABC, tell them to make us a 3-camera live show, and we'll do much better. He said it, and the mail was tremendous, and they said, make it a 3-camera show, so then we could write a little, a bigger kind of jokes, and etc. And The Odd Couple became not a big ratings hit, but it became a solid, award-winning kind of show. And The Circles of Life are wonderful. Neil Simon hated the show. He never thought it shouldn't be a TV show. But if you stay in there long enough, his kid watched it and said, Dad, it's not a bad show. You ought to watch it once in a while. And he watched it and he said, gee, they're doing pretty much what I created. And he called us and said, you know, I was mad at you guys. I don't know who you are, but you did my show. And he said, but it's good, you're doing. And he quoted lines, which is the best thing a writer can hear from another writer. He actually quoted a line. And we said, well, could we meet? And we said, you want to be on the show? And so he came on an Odd Couple episode with his daughter. We brought the daughter. You got to go where the money was. She's the one who did it. And he came on the show and he played himself, but we got to talk to him, and it was a great, great feeling. So I just tell these positive stories because people are always telling negative things, and I have not had all those negative experiences. So anyway, after the Odd Couple, Jerry Belson and I sat down and we said, we're going different ways. He wanted to go to movies. I kind of liked half hour. These are decisions in life. And I said, well, we'll break up. But, you know, we were civil enough and we were pretty close. So we said, but we'll secretly help each other. You know, if you know, you'll read mine, I'll read yours. But the first thing you got to do is when you break up, you got to each write alone because they want to know which one was the writer. So that's a big thing. I always liked partners because I procrastinate and everything. And I think like many writers, I write out of embarrassment. The fact that we get together, we say, all right, you write this. There's different ways writers teams. Sometimes one guy writes and the other guy paces. I've written like that. But Jerry and I used to write an outline, split it up. You do these three things, and I do these two scenes. It's a very hard way to write, but we were whizzes at it. We'd be in different rooms. He'd yell in, put in a broom in that first scene. I got a broom bit in mind. You know, we would just do this shorthand that we were amazing. He said, together we were one great writer. He used to say. And we started to team, and we did very well. And people ask about teams, and, you know, very important. I'm digressing into writing for a minute. You got to know how you create and how you write. Jerry Belson's first idea was the best. He was an instinctive writer. He got it, and his fifth idea was no good. I was the opposite. My first idea, terrible. But about the fourth or fifth time I did it, it was the best. So we knew that about each other. We do it. And then Sheldon Leonard once, we said, what are we talking about, Sheldon? We're now on the lecture circuit. Belson and I talk to students of writing. We don't know what we're saying, but we're talking to them. So we went to Sheldon and said, what should we say? And he said, well, for rule of thumb, he said, all creativity, he talked like me. I thought I could never be a producer. I have an accent. Worse accent than me, Sheldon Leonard. And he was a giant in the industry. He said, comes from three forks. This is right. He says, there's instincts, right? That's one. You just feel that's the right line. Then there's analyzation. You say, well, it's good. It could be good that way, but does that make the character worse? Does that make you not like him? Does that make you like him? Do you think you want him to be that funny, sarcastic? Figure it out, analyze it. And the third one is experience. I once did this, a thing like this. It worked. I'll do that again. Three forks. Figure out which one is the best for you and go with that one. So Belson figured instinct his best shot, and I figured the analyzation was mine. So that's how we used to write when we got stuck, because sometimes you blank. People say, I got writer's block. You don't have any writer's block if you're embarrassed. If we got to get it in by Thursday, and sometimes we'd make up, you write that scene, I write that scene. I didn't want to write that scene. I don't want to write anything. But I knew the next day, he would say, where are your pages? And I wouldn't have them. So, I mean, he wouldn't say it mean, but he would say it. So I said, I got to write the scene. I do it. And he would write his, and that's how we got to, just by embarrassing each other, we would get it. And that is a way of writing. And I think a lot of times free jobs come up. You know, you want to do this, a charity, I always advise take them. Because not a lot, you haven't got time, but take some of them. You meet a lot of nice people. You don't have a great feeling I did good and all that thing. That's there. but you actually get to try something and meet other writers and get other points of view. We used to do that for the presidents. Whoever was president, there'd be a group that would write jokes for the president. So I wrote for 5 presidents. And Joey Bishop was a big contributor in those days. So we would sit in the room and pitch jokes, and they wouldn't pay or anything. It was an honor. But they sent you a letter. I got a lot of letters. President Carter, thanks you. And President Johnson, President this. The only one who could deliver a line was Kennedy, and then Clinton came along. He could too, but the rest are not so funny. But Obama's got a shot. I had met him, and he understands the rhythm, so he could be, and he's a brilliant speaker. But that's what we used to do, and then Jerry and I broke up. We each wrote a script to make sure before that he did a solo credit, I did a solo credit, and
you did that before you sort of announced that you were breaking up?
Yeah, before we announced we were splitting up. This was on The
right.
Odd Couple. We each directed another Odd Couple, keep our hand in directing, and then we both wrote. And again, it's different types of episodes that are interesting to write. I wish for my whole television career, as being a network person, suddenly the budget gets up, so you start to write shows that are contained. I became a whiz at that. I wrote, they were really in trouble on the Dick Van Dyke Show. I wrote with Jerry an entire show that took place in the elevator. That was the whole show. Don Rickles started that. So we would write in attics, in basements, so you never moved the set. And so I wrote one because the actors were whining that there was too much dialogue to learn and this and that. So I wrote a whole show about my single show was they go to a monastery and they have to take a vow of silence. So they had to learn 4 lines, the beginning and at the end. All the rest was mime. They loved that show. They said, Garry, write around those other mime shows. We like that. We don't have to learn anything. So we did Part, and he, as Belson tells it, I left him. He had some crazy idea, some 50s thing named Funzy or some crazy show. I didn't want to do it. So that's when I created Happy Days, and learning from Hey Landlord what a mess that was. It was the same show. Happy Days was my growing up, but it turns out Hey Landlord was in the Bronx, New York. Nobody wanted to see that. But Happy Days, I had a producing partner named Tom Miller who lived in Milwaukee, and he said, Milwaukee's Midwest, it's nice. He said, we'll write your stuff the same way you write it, but we'll put it into a very Midwestern person's mouth. And we got Ron Howard, who does a total different rhythm than me, but it's funny. It's the same stuff. So that show went on and was successful, and then came others.
And Happy Days was the first show that you created completely by yourself, completely on your own.
The series I created.
Right.
I didn't. It ended up the episode I wrote wasn't the first episode, but we did it twice. I mean, again, a writer has to create and say, this is good, I don't care if everybody hates it. The first pilot of Happy Days, we made it. Ron Howard was in it. There was no Fonzie in it, but the rest were in it, and didn't sell, and television put it away. And then, again, luck. George Lucas made American Graffiti. They made Grease on Broadway, and television said, we have that. Where is it? Didn't we have it? I saw it once. And they took it off the shelf, and we redid it again. And the second time, Michael Eisner, I remember, he said, did you see American Graffiti? He said, I want a gang. They got a gang. I said, we have no money for a gang, Michael. I'll give you a character to represent a gang. That'll be good. We have one actor. And all right, and so that's when Fonzie came in. Fonzie was supposed to be called Masciarelli after my name, but his nickname was MASH. There was a show named MASH, so you run into an obstacle. Bob Brunner, one of the great writers, later a producer of Happy Days, created the name Fonzie. He said, Fonzarelli, call him Fonzie. I said, he's not going to say much. We'll just let him make guttural sounds. That was the character. Suddenly, he evolved. After Happy Days, my TV career started to go very well. I created Happy Days myself, with, of course, people helped. Tom Miller was a great salesman. He sold it. With Eisner, they sold it. And again, if we have to be authentically honest and all this, the Writers Guild likes who did. Originally, Michael Eisner and Tom Miller said at an airport in New Jersey on a snowstorm, they were trapped there. Let's make a show. Why don't we take that show, I Remember Mama, which was an old show, we'll make that again. And so they came to me and said, Garry, do I remember Mama? I said, it was about Norwegians. There was the lead character was Laws. I don't know how to write Laws, a Norwegian kid. I said, let me write. Well, all right. So I said, the 50s I know. So then we switched it to the 50s. But they were the pushers. You learn writing. You learn who to go to. You learn who can deliver your things right. Ron Howard was a master of delivering exhibition. In those days, we called it laying pipe. Somebody has to set you up, and he laid more pipe on the Happy Days series. So much we saluted him when he was leaving. When he was laying the pipe for another episode, we sent two guys carrying pipes across behind him just to say thank you, Ron, for all the years of laying the pipe for us. But it was a nice bunch of people, the Happy Days people, probably the nicest bunch of human beings we had to gather. They were happy to work. Ron Howard at the top was a gentleman. And from there, we spun off other shows. It became apparent in the industry that shows evolved rather than were just created. Fonzie was a minor character. He evolved. Fred Silverman taught that theory to everybody. He was an executive, and he taught us how to evolve and how to spin off. He said, you just can't spin off. It's all about how you promo it. So we went to fullest extent. We had Fonzie put his arm around Laverne and Shirley after that and say, these girls have their own show. They're my friends. I'm the Fonz. And people watched Laverne and Shirley, one of the, I think, first sitcoms that ever debuted #1 in the ratings. Its opening pilot was #1 in the ratings. And then we found Mork and Mindy. We found Robin Williams again. Go where you can find people who know what you're doing. They said create some show. Eisner said you got to create a show because in TV there comes a time they pick the pilots. They pick the pilots, and then I guess there's like a 3-hour period, you know better than I, where they think everything's terrible. And that's when you get in there. So Eisner said, we got to call them because they think everything stinks. So you make up a show. I said, I have no show. You make it up. So I mentioned to the network on the phone, the whole network, big shots, and said, I had a guy on the show. His name was Robin Williams. He was a guest on Happy Days because my son wouldn't watch the show unless I had somebody from space in the show. So I made a space guy. We put him in, and his name was Robin Williams. And there was silence. And finally, a voice said, "I know that show. He's a genius." It was Marcy Carsey, the only one who ever watched the show to know who was great. And I said, "She's right. He is. He can be a show." And they said, "What's the show?" And I made up things. And Moss, you can do anything creatively. It's not always the writing of the word, it's how you put it together. And they said, "Who's in it?" And I said, "There's a girl I saw in a pilot. She was a nun, but at the beginning, she wasn't a great nun. But before she was a nun, Bob Brunner had written it. She rode on a bicycle, and then she put on a nun suit. I said, "Get the part." She rode on a bicycle. She's good. So Marcy herself cut it all together. Cut a Robin Williams from Happy Days and the girl on a bicycle, made a 4-minute film. I was on vacation. They called me. They said, "You're on Thursdays at 8 o'clock. Came Mork and Mindy. Again, a very hip show, Mork and Mindy. Happy Days, I almost leave it to Beaver with some laughs and some edginess, but not that much. Laverne and Shirley taught everything to my sister Penny and Cindy Williams that I learned from Lucy, who I watched for years. And that was the best physical show on. So they all were on. We did Joni Loves Chachi, and we kept spinning things off. Some worked, some didn't. But it was a whole television era of writing up until the early 80s.
Could you say something about casting also? Because when you mentioned, for instance, Penny and Cindy, no one in the world could imagine anybody but those two women playing those parts now, of course. But was Cindy what you were looking for at the time? Did you know her before this? I mean, how do you go about that?
Well, I think as a writer, you write, and then you want to have something to say about your writing, not just give it to somebody. And then after you get to say something, you realize that it's really important who's saying your words that you wrote. And on television from the Bronx, you say television. In television, you need somebody who can sustain. You can't just do a Broadway play and the actor works the play and goes home. You need to get characters that exist for more than just that episode. So casting becomes very important for the writer to get somebody who can deliver the words. And a lot of times, a lot of people have different ideas. Casting is very often subjective. I learned early that nepotism was not bad, so I made it an art form. I hired people who I knew were funny and could deliver it, even though some were not known. And Laverne and Shirley, my sister Penny, was funny. I knew from the early days of my life. And Cindy Williams was a friend. They were a writing team. They worked for Carl Gottlieb, who was an officer of the Writers Guild, and they were writing something as a team, and I needed two girls from the other side of the tracks who looked like they were from, the street. My sister has an accent also, whinier than me, but an accent, and we did an episode of Happy Days, and it was obvious to most of the people on the show that they looked like a series, and so we used them again. And then Robin Williams was, again, I think the best thing I have as far as, other than writing the word, casting, putting shows together, is to do what my father said. Maybe somebody smarter than you. Listen a minute. And my sister said, this alien you're casting, you got Jonathan Winters, John Miner, all the great guys, but there's a new kid. You don't know who he is. Robin Williams. My sister Ronnie was casting and producing then, and I said, what has he done? And she said very clearly, she said, he stands on a street corner, he puts his hat down, and he mimes and does voices and does things, and that's what he's done. He once did a TV show for George Slaughter for 2 minutes. I said, that's his credits. That's who I'm going to bring in to be that. And she said it right now. She says, his hat is awful full. And it was. He used to fill a whole hat with dollars. And I said, all right, bring him in. And Robin auditioned, which I'm famous. Sorry, he auditioned standing on his head, and we gave him the job. And so casting, I don't think anybody else could have been Mork. Some other people might have been Laverne and Shirley, but never as good, because there were no stunt people on Laverne and Shirley. They did all their own stunts, and you have to protect them. The fighting with my sister and I, fighting about, you got to wear a helmet. I'm not wearing a helmet. They can't see my face. Cindy and I are cute. No, you got to wear helmets. You'll break your head. They fell once, and they were glad they had the helmets. So casting is equally important. But then we did the shows, and creating shows seemed to be something I enjoyed, something I did it right. Me and the Chimp was a terrible show. Cast the wrong chimp, I say as a joke, but it was not good writing. And it just didn't work, and so you got to be prepared as a writer that everything you write is not perfect. Sometimes it's totally miscast, and I think sometimes it just doesn't work. And the Sheldon Leonard also taught us, after I made a lot of mistakes, that a show's success sometimes is based on the creative side of what you create in that, but the two other factors are very important, and one is the time slot where you put the show. That's as important sometimes as what you create. And the third factor, which I learned so well from him, was, it's a thing that nobody talks about much. It's called the time in history. Sometimes you can think. You can't just say, well, I wasn't lucky, the wrong time in history. You can actually think that time in history. And I did notice that when you watch the sitcoms on television, the women were coming. I always hired women writers because it was male point of view was getting a little boring, and the women had a whole different view. And we hired all the writers that I hired in those days. They were all seemed to be named Susan. There was Susan Seeger, Susan Silver, Susan Harris. They were all Susan. So anybody named Susan, I said, "You write comedy, dear? Come with us." And we took them from all over the place, and so we had different elements in the show because we had writers, and then they let us have Afro-American writers, and in Spanish we had everybody. I had a writer named Freddie Meyer, and he said, I had us hire, he said, you know, I'm really Spanish. My name is Mayo, M-A-I. I said, really? I said, we're hiring a Spanish writer. We changed his name just so he could come in under the Spanish writer thing. When I started, there were like 3 college graduates writing comedy. Comedy is the land of all misfits, alcoholics, people who were wandering, people who couldn't come dressed nice. There was all a lot of crazy guys. But then it turned, and came people from, unfortunately for this country, a lot of people at Harvard and Brown and Yale said, who wants to be president? Let's go make money and meet girls. So they all came, and the girls came to meet boys. It was a whole new wave. I worked on Murphy Brown as an actor. The entire staff came from top schools. So who knew why? But whatever, we would break in people, and some people with a different point of view, and we would go on. And then I went into movies, right? I said, let's go to movies. So it was scary in those days because they didn't like television people, the movie people. They said it was lower than that. And the theater people wouldn't talk to us anyway. They wouldn't even say hello. So we kind of, in a way, banded together. And we said, well, let's try movies. And we all kind of came together. It was Rob Reiner, Jim Brooks, myself, my sister Penny, and Ron Howard. Ron Howard was the leader just because he went in first. And he did something. He my Dutch Grand Theft Auto he started making. I was always cast as a gangster. Garry, you'll come. I need like a mobster. I need your accent. So I remember the first time, I think it was his first picture, I did a scene, and he yelled, cut. He said, how'd I do? Was I good? I said, yeah, you said good. You told me to do this and that. But he was so good and so did his homework, was so prepared and everything. So the 5 of us went in, and we helped each other at the early stages because Jim Brooks was doing Terms of Endearment, and he said, when I make a suggestion, they roll their eyes. They go, you really want to do that? He said, so depressing. I said, but you got to do it. It's good. Just fight through. I remember I wrote him a letter. This is what they're going to do. It's all right. And then I had a screening of my picture out in Oxnard. He got in a car, Jim. He drove out. He gave me notes, and we all would go and help Penny. You know, Penny was a pioneer. You know, as the women directors go, but we all helped her because we were all whizzes at writing. What we understood and we brought to movies that other guys maybe did, but nobody did as good as us, and now they do it brilliantly. We understood a term called wild lines, that after the film is done, you can look at it and you can put lines over the back of people's heads, or you can cut to her and let him start. If you look at a wonderful picture called League of Their Own, the first 5 big laughs are all wild lines. Nobody said them. We all went and wrote jokes for her to put it in later. So there was, for a writer who came from television, the picture was never over. We'd be still fixing and writing and throwing in another line, different from the pure director who does it with a helicopter shot. We had, we could always write our way there. And a lot of us were hired. I know I was. Let's get Garry. He'll give us this beautiful shot and make it a. No, get Garry. He'll fix the scene. That's why you were hired, because you could write your way out of whatever bag you are. And the television people became very big in movies because what you're taught as a television writer to finish. You got to finish. It's on the air. You got to turn it over. So we all learned to close and to finish, and that was a big part of writing. You couldn't, well, I'll think of a new idea. Write a play, write a novel.
Right.
You're under the gun when you're in TV and movies, and I went on to write some movies, and I felt that that was a big part of my career. Was I knew how to fix a scene by writing, even though I don't take credit. There's a guild you got to send all your material in, but I wrote Flamingo Kid, an early film that I wrote. It said written by Neil Markowitz and Garry Marshall. No, it said written by Neil Marshall and Garry Marshall. Neil Marshall's real name is Markowitz. My real name is Masciarelli. There were no Marshalls, but that's what the credit reads, written by. And a wonderful writer, because there's a new business for writers came about more and more. I guess they did it in the old days. Is a rewriter. A lot of the great writers, Gans and Mandel, who worked for me on Happy Days, became very famous for rewriting everybody's stuff. They wrote some beautiful screenplays. Parenthood's one of the best screenplays ever, I think they wrote. But they write a lot fixing other people's work. Bo Goldman fixed Flamingo Kid. His name is not on it all. It said Neil Marshall and Garry Marshall, but they should have also said Bo Goldman fixed the key things, because he also talked about how to write a scene in the movie. And I remember this scene I had written, and then he rewrote it, and I said, it's kind of banal, it's just chatting. He says, no, it's a movie. He says, the scene is not so much about the words. He says, the words, they're just chatting, but it's what they're looking, how they look at each other is what this is his son. He doesn't want to tell his father, so he's talking about bananas, and the father's dying to get the son, and the sister wants to leave the table, but she has to say, and the mother's afraid he's going to yell. So they're all playing something, but the words are not what the scene's about. It's the behavior it's what about. And he really was, again, you keep learning as a writer. He taught me how to write behavior. And I've used it in all my films, because in films, in television there really isn't enough time, but in movies, and you can get in close. And I always have said, if you're on the stage, you got to go from the toes to the head. You got to move. You got to use your whole body. TV, waist up. Dick Van Dyke, one of the best waist up actors ever. He could work waist up in TV. I mean, in movies. In movies, it's right in here, and you can see the eyes of the actor. And a lot of times, you look in those eyes and nobody's home, and the audience knows nobody's home, and they don't believe a word they're saying. So that doesn't work. They don't know what. I'll tell you what worked. Nobody's home. But then you have other actors who, such is going on in that face and in those eyes. It's amazing what they can do. And people, not the award people who give out awards, but people in Ohio, no, that's good. And who is that ditzy person?
You have a new play now that you're working on, or that's up and running. I assume you're still working on it.
I'm always working. Nothing is ever done till they take it out of my hand.
Is this your most current project? Are you working on anything else, or is this your most current project, the play?
Well, I like to keep working on things. I am a trivia question. What was the play that was at the Winter Garden before Cats came in? Probably no one knows. It was called The Roast. I wrote it with Jerry Belson. The roast lasted 3 nights. Cats ran for 18 years. Now, those who are think they're going to be a writer, it's a fair business. They're in the wrong business. 3 nights, 18 years. It was really not even 3 nights. If you only run for 1 night, you don't get insurance. So you got to run 3 nights to get the insurance. That's how bad this thing turned out. We tried so hard, but it didn't work. So you sometimes take hits. You do something. It's depressing. Look at this, what happened. But I still love theater, and I ended up building my own small theater so I could try out things. And the play that's currently at the Falcon Theater is a play I started to write when my hands were shaking and I went to Palm Springs, which was 40 years ago. So I never threw it away, and I think, as many writers have told me, my parents passed away, so it was a better time to write it, and I didn't need wrath from the parents in the middle of everything. But it's about my parents, loosely based on my parents. It's called Everybody Say Cheese. And another thing that became very important in my writing, as I think back, is the title is very important. Who knew your name and everything? But titles sometimes go. The play, I have Everybody Say Cheese, and they know it's a comedy. It's funny. It was used to be called Shelves, because my father was obsessed with building shelves. He didn't know how to communicate later in life, so he came wherever you lived and built you a shelf. Not even a good one, cockeyed. He came to the village and built one. It fell down. We said, it was great. The shelf is great there. But that was the play I started then. So playwriting is a wonderful way of writing. Nobody bothers you. It's still true in television. It's the showrunner, head writer's medium. In films, it's the directors. But in theater, it's the playwright. The playwright is king. And you write it, and they can't change it. And so I've written a few plays. The Roast, we don't think we're ever doing again. But this new play, I think, is I'm enjoying. I'm still fixing, because you still can fix. If you ever worked TV, Wednesday you fix, Thursday you fix, Friday you can fix a little. You knew how to fix without changing everything around. But and then you go with the wind. The wind blows this way, that way, whatever is there. There's reality shows going on, very interesting. I've never written one, but I think about it, and I've been on them. But more interest to me was everything is becoming a musical. So we now have the Happy Days musical. It's national tour. It's on now. It played in various cities, but now it's all over the country. Probably won't go to Broadway. It's not exactly a Broadway type show. As the series was never, let's see what the New York Times said about it. But it was a top show, and the people like it. Same with the musical. We pack them in, and the people enjoy it. We got Henry Winkler was a tremendous piece of casting for Happy Days, and now we got a kid that Henry and I both worked on together to teach him how to do Fonzie, sing and dance, and still be Fonzie. And he's great, this kid. We got Joey Sorge. So again, the casting, what's the use of writing woe and hey, you got somebody who can't do it. So Henry helped a lot with it. And I think all the tools are important. I've learned over the years in all medium. Just don't, knock it. A writer once said to me, I was writing a monologue for Danny Thomas for a special, and I said, well, let's go down and see how the balloons are on the set. I hit it, put in the set, and he said, you're not into balloons. Who cares about the balloons? Write the jokes. But I went down anyway because I wanted to see. The balloons gave me an idea of how to write when he first came out. So I think all the tools are there. And I think I should say something about rejection in that the Roast on Broadway was not a great rejection. And me and the Chimp and many others. But I think once I was on a different job for Danny Thomas, and there was a great writer named Harry Crane who wrote for everybody. He got us to write for the Rat Pack and stuff. Was a brilliant writer. And I remember Danny once looked at another skit we wrote. He says, this is terrible. And he said, it's no good. I got to do that. And this is it. I'm fed up with all of this, Harry. I don't want to. And he said, come here. He said, look out the window. You see that building? There's men in hard hats walking on those girders. You're inside. You got the coffee machine. You got a couple of M&Ms. You got a desk. You got a paper. You're warm. The heat is perfect. You want to go out on the girder with the high hat, the hard hat? You don't want to do that, do you? I said, no. He said, so be very happy that you're writing. So you'll write it 4 times. Better than going on the girder, because I know you'd fall off, you get hurt, it'd be over for you. So anytime I get really, I can't write it, nobody liked it, I say, at least I'm not on a hard hat walking around a girder, because I don't know how to do that. This I know how to do. Maybe I messed it up now, but I'll do it right again. I used to lecture at Stan Gelman's acting class. Now I do colleges all over. Yale, you went to Yale. I'm telling him all these theories about writing, and the guy says, "Will you talk about Happy Days from it?" You know, they want to know all the. Tell us Julia Roberts. She was fun. You know, so no matter where you go, it's the same thing. But again, sometimes you try to give advice, and the advice is basically blank paper is the hardest thing to fill. Every other job I think is a little easier. The hardest job is filling blank paper, but you have to do it, and whatever spurs you on to write it, you got to do it. You can't write a whole. I mean, yeah, I wrote it in 2 days. That's an exception. It takes a time to write it. You write 2 pages at a time, 3 pages at a time. And, you know, Billy Wilder and I.A. Diamond used to say, we write like 3 pages, and then we go out and look, and maybe we buy a little art, or we look at some art, or we go and we get something to eat. And Lowell Gans said to him at the point we were talking, Billy Wilder said, Lowell said, you know, we write sometimes 20 pages a day, sometimes, 25. And Wilder looked at him and said, well, we only write 3, but maybe 25 are not quite as good. And I said, well, write at your own pace. Don't write what somebody else wrote. And keep writing, because it takes a long time. And I do this advice. I speak sometimes at graduations, and my best advice is it's still, unless you're an orphan or something or come from a terrible background, there's a family involved. And the point where you get mostly deterred is that your parents are hocking you, everybody's hocking you. So my advice is you must, early in your writing career, teach your parents to lie, because they have to say something at the supermarket, or they have to say something at the cocktail party. So teach them they should lie. What is your son doing? How is he doing? He's working for the government in Arizona. I can't talk about it. It's not allowed to be discussed, but he's doing well. It's very important, but I shouldn't even have said this much. Teach them to lie and make up stories, because if no parent in the world wants to say, my son's a waiter, nobody will read his material, and he's not even a good waiter. They don't want to say that. So it's your job as a writer to give them other things. At least someone to sell your work. Write them a little dialogue so they'll get off your back, and then you can concentrate on your own work, because negativity, and that's no good, and it really ruins a lot of writers. And there is no such thing as nobody will ever read my writing. It doesn't matter. I was very fortunate. I grew up in New York. There was a lot of entertainment. I went to school in Chicago, not a bus stop. There's action in Chicago. But it doesn't matter where you're from. I remember, people send scripts all the time, and who knows if you read them. I remember Jim Brooks got a script. He was doing Mary Tyler, or something. I was doing Odd Couple. And he said, there's a script somebody sent me. It's, you like it. It's not us. It's jokes and craziness, but take a look. And I looked, and sure enough, it was a girl, and it was our rhythm that we were doing on Odd Couple. So I saw she was from Monroeville, Pennsylvania, right? I never heard of that. But I called, and I said, hi, is Marilyn home? Who is this? I'm Garry from Hollywood. And I hear her mother gets up. Oh, who are you? What are you calling? Are you one of those perverts? No, I'm a producer. Produce Odd Couple. Let me call you back. I don't know who you are. So I gave it a number. Paramount, I waited. Ring. Hello? It's me. It's the same person. Is this really the Paramount number? You're not. Drove me nuts. I said, who is your daughter? She's 21 years old. She was working at the May Company in Pittsburgh or something. She was near her. I said, she's pretty good at writing. I said, does she want to come out for a 3-week try to come visit? Well, we'll ask our father when he comes home. All right. I said, oh, we're going to have fun with this. But eventually they called back. She must have yelled at her mother. Her name was Marilyn Suzanne Miller, and she became one of the biggest writers on Saturday Night Live and wrote for everybody. And it just goes to show, my point is, doesn't matter where you are, we'll find you. Writing, you just need the blank paper and a pencil. So write, send it so somebody doesn't read it, somebody else doesn't read it. I always advise, don't send it to the top person. He's busy. Look at the credits. Send it to script consultant number 3. Hello, I wrote this. You want to look at it? Because then the guy makes this big decision. This could be better than me. I'll burn it. Or, this is not bad. I could be a big shot. And look, I'll say, look at the script I found. So no matter where you are, Yuma, Arizona, you say, I can't, nobody will talk. Pencil and paper and the mail. You can mail anything, any place, and we'll find you. I know who's funny in Australia. I know who's funny in Canada. And you're usually among our network of people and friends, somebody will say this, and there's a writer, or, now sometimes you look for an actor, but writing is still the key to filling the blank paper. So no matter where you are, write, and we'll find you.